Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Watt. We're on the match day, Colin. We're up against St Mirren. Thoughts on the unchanged lineup?
Well, I think it came out just before the game the other night that we'd made 33 different team selections for 36 games. So to have 2 games in a row with an unchanged team, an unchanged selection, it's quite incredible. I don't even think the subs have changed for today. So I think the concentration today will be getting the 3 points. It'll be a tough game. St Mirren obviously had a fantastic win the other night against Dundee United, winning 5-1. Just watching Celtic TV in the background here, I see Gary Caldwell's come back in. Still think I'd probably rather have him at centre-half than near Beaton today. And what's Stephen Welsh got to do to get a chance to earn that jersey? But it's the same team. Let's hope for a similar result again tonight.
See the thing though, Colin, right? You're talking about near Beaton at centre-half. Now, for anybody who's a long-time listener of A Celtic State of Mind, we did 10 in a row, I think it was, Team of the Decade. And we got everybody, all the contributors were to pick their Team of the Decade. And if I'm not mistaken, you picked near Beaton at centre-half.
Yep.
So what's changed your mind?
The reason it's changed so drastically over the last 12 months is just this complete lack of professionalism in his dipping performances. He's not a centre-half, but he has been known to come in and step in over the years to do so. This year's definitely been the worst year of near Beaton. There's been times before where he's come in, he's made a performance in Europe, or he's sort of come in when we've been really desperately short. But this has shown why we can't rely on him week in, week out. So I'm not surprised.
So are you going to change your Team of the Decade then? Is Beaton no longer part of the centre-half partnership?
I'd probably would, I mean, it got people talking, but that's what this platform's for, isn't it? You get people coming on here throwing conspiracy theories out there, and it gets people talking. So let's see. Obviously, the Beaton thing got people talking, and it's something you remember. I'm all right with that.
Yeah, absolutely memorable, right enough. Now, when we're looking at that lineup, I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of criticism around the lack of consistency of team selection from Neil Lennon, and he's gone for the same team back to back. So we've got Scott Bain, who's reinstalled as Celtic's number 1. Colin, what did you make of that news when obviously we've already had information that Barkas was our number 1, hence the dropping of Hazard? Are you quite happy to run with Bain? Because it doesn't look, I'd be amazed if we brought in another goalie in this transfer window.
Like, Scott Bain's not Celtic's number 1. Neil Lennon can come out and say it, but he changed his mind after 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, Barkas was his number 1. Now Scott Bain's his number 1. Conor Hazard's always been his number 3, apparently, but yeah, he was his number 1 when he threw him in for the quadruple treble final. It makes no sense what Neil Lennon comes out and saying. I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Bain gets dropped in a couple of weeks' time and Barkas comes back in, and then he goes back to saying, I just needed Barkas to get a bit of time out and he'll come back and he'll be my number 1. I don't even think he knows who his number 1 is. So I'm not buying that Scott Bain's the number 1. The only thing I will agree with him in is that Barkas hasn't adopted to the Scottish game yet. I can see that. You can see it in his performances so far. But there's no way to support him to come out and say that Bain's my number 1, unless he thinks it's going to light a fire under him to do something in training to get him to win the jersey back. But as fans, we can look at it and say Scott Bain's not the number 1 goalkeeper at Celtic.
Well, when you look at Barkas, I mean, he's given us nothing to suggest that he would have that fire in his belly, Colin, no matter what was done in terms of the team selection. You spoke there about him failing to adapt. I mean, obviously, Neil Lennon said he hadn't got up to speed with the Scottish game. It's obviously been difficult under the circumstances with any new player coming in from a different country to adapt when you're unable to get in about the kind of the team spirit of things. I'll go back to, and I know the game's changed, but I'll go back to sides in the past where there was that harmony amongst the side, and obviously they socialised away from the game. And I don't mean going out drinking, etc., but there's a different way of doing it. That's completely been removed from football and from society this year. How big a part do you think that is? I know that you think about footballers, Colin, and you almost talk about them as if they're not human beings. They've still got, a situation where they're coming to a foreign land. Sometimes they're coming here without their family, without their kids, and they're unable to socialise. Now, they can't just flick a switch and then start performing, and I think that's been a big part. So when Neil Lennon was talking about getting up to speed, does that mean to you, looking at it from the outside, that he has no future? Because, if he hasn't got up to speed in 6-7 months, I don't think he will.
It seems to be a reoccurring theme with some players when they come to Celtic. We've heard this before when it came to people like Marian Sved. He's not quite got up to the speed. We've not seen it in training. He's not quite fitting in. We've seen it before with people like Bayo. Even for a long time, it was said about Patrick Klimala as well. He hadn't quite got up to the speed. We're not giving him the minutes because he doesn't fit in. This should surely be part of the scouting process, that they can take a look at it. They can see the kind of person that he is. If they watch him for long enough, they would understand it. They would get to know that when they get to meet him, when they're having the meetings about his future, when they're talking about his contract. You get to understand the person because you're meeting them face to face. If this hasn't been part of the feedback that they've received when they've been looking for references on players, then the scouting's not going deep enough. Yeah, okay. Sorry, on you go, Paul.
Do you think he has a future at the club, Colin? Does he have a future at Celtic?
I would say he has probably till this time next year to prove himself. I think they'll give him another 6 months, like at the start of next season.
The comparison I was making was that the pre-season, in terms of the actual personnel, I think it's very similar to the pre-season following the Barnes and Dalglish season. Barnes comes in with Dalglish. Although he wasn't called a director of football, the position that he had at the club was more or less a director of football position, Colin. So we bring in a lot of big name players. Obviously, some of them turned out to be a good kind of addition to Celtic, but not that season, such as Stan Petrov, for example. And we brought in, 2 £5 million players in Berkovic and Raphael Scheidt. So what then happened was the incoming manager back then and his team, Martin O'Neill, they're looking at these guys thinking, I can't get a turn out of these. I can't use them and utilise them. So then you end up taking a massive hit. I don't think we made any money on Raphael. He went back to Brazil on loan, eventually ran down his contract and he was released. So that was a huge loss. I know I'm going back a while, but, potentially this pre-season, we're going to have an outgoing management team. We're going to have an incoming management team, I would guess. And then you're going to be assessing that squad, Colin. And you've got a couple of guys in there in Ayeti and Barkas who were £5 million buys, there or thereabouts. They might not have a future at Celtic.
No, definitely. And to see, when you look at a player's value, it's only as much as what the club's willing to pay for the team, for the player. So the fact that we've paid £5 million but for each of those players, it's only because that's what we thought they were worth. Now, they've not shown that so far. I think Ayeti did well at the start of the season. And the comparison's always going to be drawn between Ayeti and Ivan Toney. But when you look at Ivan Toney, he's in a team that's doing well. They're creating a lot of chances. He's getting a lot of service. Ayeti's not had that many chances since his injury was picked up against Hibs. When he came back, he's been thrown in sort of 45 minutes here, 30 minutes there. He's never really been given a run. Although a lot of people will come back and say, well, even in the times that he has been given a run, he's not done anything to show why he should stay in the team. But, the fact of the matter is he's going to be here in the summer. If you're looking at a squad evaluation, between now and the end of the season, there's very little to play for. You're playing for second place. I don't think the Scottish Cup will go ahead. We've seen that the next round of that has been postponed back again. That might not be until next season that we have the Scottish Cup. So guys like that do have to get some minutes here and there. We have to give Klimala, Ayeti a chance to see what they've got, to see if in the summer it's something that Nicky Hammond, if he stays, suggests to the new manager that this player's not up to speed. Take a look at him yourself. Should we move him on? But the fact of the matter is, he's not really had enough game time to fully judge him.
Well, the thing you mentioned, Nicky Hammond there, obviously big changes at Celtic Park have been announced this week, and we'll talk about that as well, Colin, because I didn't have the opportunity yesterday to discuss it with yourself specifically. But I think we're looking at an upheaval of the football department in the summer. So, there's no guarantee in my mind that Nicky Hammond will be part of that. Recruitment I was saying yesterday, I think recruitment is one of the biggest objectives, to improve on how we're recruiting players. Now, when you say that, a lot of people then, pluck out all the big names, the guys that we made a really good profit on, from Van Dijk and Wanyama to Fraser Foster, Dembele, and of course Frimpong. But I think over the piece, we've really eaten into the profits that we've made on the big sales call, and by bringing in project after project. You've mentioned a few of them already in this show. So I think the recruitment aspect of things has to improve, but the whole process and the structure of that has to improve. So, there could be a situation where Nicky Hammond won't be part of that process. Do you think Celtic are going to be making big sweeping changes to that degree?
I do have a feeling, and I said it on Wednesday on the bulletin, I feel like this is the end of an era for Celtic. You're seeing it now. I mean, Peter Lawwell retiring in the summer. I think he's 61 or something now. He's been here something like 17, 18 years. To me, his replacement being a younger person, I think he's only in his 40s, suggests that we're trying to lay the foundations now for the next generation, for the next era at Celtic. If we're talking about Ross Desmond coming in, as the rumours around the club at the minute, again, it's someone that's in his 40s. It's someone that can go on to make a career at Celtic. And I think, if anything, that is the sort of light switch that tells you this is a new era and it's a new beginning at Celtic. And that will only happen if the sweeping changes are made. So it may mean that we do have to change the structure of the club. We might have to bring in a director of football. We might have to bring in a manager that, I don't know. Like I said on the comment section yesterday, we always talk about being the team that develops players and moves them on for big profits. We could also do that with management teams as well. We could also bring in managers with a lot of potential, and on the basis of knowing that we do need to have the next one ready, because this one is going to make us move to the Premier League and you're going to get 7, 8, 9 million pounds for them. Mm-hmm. We do have to get that sort of supply chain, that the conveyor belt going, because the only way a manager can go is he can either get sacked or he can go to another club. And when you go to another club, generally it's because you've done really well.
And your stock has risen, absolutely. You know what, Colin? I think it's a good point, because, Kevin Graham made a similar point a wee while back, talking about, obviously, the outgoing Brendan Rodgers, the money that we made in compensation, because, as you say, he, increased his stock to such a level that he's a sought-after manager again. Something that, he probably realised back when Celtic made the approach that was always going to be the plan for him. Maybe the club didn't, I'm not too sure. But I think the actual appointment that came after Brendan Rodgers was completely the opposite, because we'd already seen Neil Lennon in his pomp, first time round, where we're beating the so-called best team in the world in Europe. We're winning leagues. And when he became available, the level that he was able to attain was Bolton Wanderers. And at that time, that was a basket case of a club. So I think the point has been made by Kevin Graham, and he was absolutely vilified for making the point. But if you're going to look at the football department, like you say, if you've got this conveyor belt of young talented players coming through, or you're picking them up and selling them on, as we have done fairly successfully, but as I say, when you look at the actual balance sheet over the piece, we have eaten into the profits quite a bit. Then, maybe the management stroke coaching team would be that. How long does a management coaching team have? What's the lifespan of that anyway, Colin, to keep things fresh? Is it 3 to 5 years?
I would say that would be roughly the case. But I think if you are going to go down that route, and I know Kevin's been one that has really pushed for Jack Ross to be the next manager. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Jack Ross being the next manager of Celtic. But would I be against Jack Ross coming in and him having a more experienced director of football above him? That might not be a bad approach to take. If you take a look at David Moyes at Manchester United, he was thrown in at the deep end. Everyone slaughtered him for the way that Manchester United ended. But he was thrown in there to replace someone like Alex Ferguson. And the whole structure of the club needed to change. You've not seen Manchester United get back to the way that they should be until this season after Ferguson left. Now, we've just had 9 years of winning the league, winning trophies, trebles, quadruple trebles, but that's going to end this season. This could be the first trophyless season for Celtic since Tony Mowbray's season in charge. And you have to rebuild and restructure. So if you're going to bring in a director of football, that would be all well and good. That means you could bring in a sort of less experienced manager who could take on the job, because the Celtic job is a lot of pressure. You can see what it's done to Neil Lennon over the time that he's been in charge. You need someone with that experience, and if you've not got that, you need someone that they can fall back upon. I think that was one of the downfalls in Ronnie Dyler's period at Celtic, was when things get tough, there was no one above him that he could go to that would help him out, that would guide him through the situation. Because I think he was genuinely a very good coach, but he just didn't have that person that helped get him the respect amongst the team.
Sorry, I was just trying to get my link working on Celtic TV there, Colin. So we've got some comments coming in. Obviously, it's been a massive news week in terms of Celtic. We've looked at the team stays as is. When we're looking at the development of youth, you've already brought up Beaton. Do you think it was an opportunity over the last couple of games, Colin, to bring Welsh back into the team perhaps?
Definitely. I don't think the boy Welsh has done anything wrong in his time that he's been in the team. I mean, I think he's played 3 league games for Celtic in his time that he's been here. He played the game against AC Milan and he was taken off. But when he played against Hibs the other week, he was the best defender on that team. He was one of the best players in the team overall. And then as soon as Beaton becomes available again, he's dropped back on the bench. If I'm Stephen Welsh sitting on that bench, I'm sitting going, does it matter what I do in training? How much have I got to do to get into that team? I don't think the boy could do any more.
The big thing is, Colin, that's fine if you're neck and neck with the league leaders and there's a point or 2 points in it. And I can understand then that you're going to go for experience. I really get that. And although on one hand I'm going on about the fact that the club needs to look at the youth policy and the way that we rear the young players and progress them into the first team, as difficult as that is in Scottish football, because you've raised that yourself, I get why we haven't done it a lot of the time, because every point's a prisoner when you're going neck and neck. However, we haven't been going neck and neck. When was the last time that happened during the 9 in a row era? And I just felt that there was certainly times in the past where we could have been bleeding these young guys in, to the point where, when Welsh comes back from Morton, he was recalled on loan. He's got 1 game under his belt as a Celtic player. I think it was against Hamilton. And then when the time comes, we're throwing him in against Rangers. And, when you're looking at pivotal moments of this season, the Rangers game at Celtic Park is one such moment where we didn't turn up. And you're looking at some of the reasons for that. Well, we're playing some inexperienced players. Klamala that day, was completely ineffective. And, I try my best not to pinpoint specific players at times, because I do feel that they're sometimes thrown to the wolves under those circumstances. So we're now looking at a situation, Colin, where we're very thin on the ground in defence. We're playing Ayer out of position. Who are our other right back options? Well, at the moment, the only one we've got is Ralston, because Elhamed obviously isn't even fit enough for the bench. But we won't play Ralston because he came through the ranks and he's kind of looked upon as being an average or less than average player. When in actual fact, when you're playing teams like Livingston, for example, at home, and he does get an opportunity, he didn't play any worse than anyone else on the park. I was criticised even for saying that, the fact that Ralston did have a decent enough game. So we're looking at a situation at the moment where he's relying on the guys that he trusts, Neil Lennon, when you're looking at, rather than bleeding in the likes of Welsh. And that leaves us with a situation when we've got Barkas and Ayeti on the bench, the 2 big signings, plus Laxalt, Uruguayan internationalist, AC Milan, and he's sitting on the bench. You've got guys like Mikey Johnson, whose recuperation, obviously a big part of that is getting game time. Yeah, he's sitting on the bench the last game and today as well. So it is still a concern, but you're looking at that league table. I don't think there's absolutely any chance that Celtic are going to have another 2-12, if you like, situation where we end up fighting for second. We're going to finish second this season, Colin, right? So why not try and bleed some of these guys in?
Well, you take a look at it. We recalled someone, Scott Robertson, from his loan spell because of the COVID outbreak, because we were so short on bodies. But we knew this was only going to be for 2 games. Mm-hmm. We knew that the rest of the squad were going to come back, and going with the selections this season, Neil Lennon was going to go with the players that he'd stuck with. I mean, you take a look at it. What could Robertson do that the boy Henderson couldn't do? So why recall him? Unless there was something in his loan term that Celtic weren't happy with, that he wasn't getting games, which wasn't the case, then why recall him for basically what was 1 game? Because we didn't have him for the Hibs game, but we did have him for the Livingston game. He was on the bench. Now he's away back on loan to Doncaster. What was the point in that? That was completely unnecessary. As you said, it feels as though that, and as AJSC Technology Video says, the team actually picks itself at the minute. The team picks itself at the minute because Lennon is going with the players that he believes he can trust and is tried and tested. But that didn't work for him earlier in the season. That is why we ended up on a 2 or 3-12 run, because he kept playing players like Ryan Christie completely out of position. When his form was dreadful, he kept picking the players that he believed they could trust. Scott Brown could have been dropped weeks and weeks and weeks before he was. And you saw what happened when you put that fresh injection of players into the team. It suddenly picked up a bit. Now you've got players like Sorrow and Turnbull that are undroppable at the minute.
No, they are. And as you said there, you mentioned Scott Brown and Christie, because I know you're a big fan of the latter. But, really, he picked players that were keeping Sorrow and Turnbull out the team, I think is a greater point there, Colin. If you had seen what they were doing, and we don't on a day-to-day basis, because there isn't a development team playing week in, week out. There isn't a reserve team playing week in, week out. You can't tune in on Celtic TV as you used to be able to back in the days of Paddy McCourt, because you knew that if Paddy McCourt was playing for the reserves, then you were in for a treat. But you can't do that these days. But obviously the club are seeing him. The coaching staff are seeing him on a daily basis. So you should have been looking at the likes of Turnbull and Sorrow. And I think, looking back, and it's great with hindsight, but I think when we look back on this season, that's one of the most pivotal reasons why we didn't get a run of form. The consistency that perhaps we had in the second half of last season, Colin, hasn't been there this season. We had a small spell after the Lille game where we went through the month of December, and it looked as though we were kind of getting a bit of momentum going. And I think JP made a brilliant point. That moment when Julien's knee collides with the post, again, another moment of the season that was huge. It was huge for Celtic, because what we're now doing is we're seeing a defence that has been thrown together. Guys are playing out of position. And I know that Kevin Graham says Beaton is a centre-half now, because he never plays in midfield, and I totally get that. But I don't think he's a natural centre-half. And Ayer, as well as he plays at right back, we miss him at centre-half. So although he's playing really well at right back, and I love seeing him up and down the right, I would much rather he was in the centre-half position, Colin, because he's much stronger in there. And again, with the change in goalkeepers, it's, see from Sorrow forwards, I think you've got a situation there where you're looking at their players and you're thinking you're going to get a tune out of Turnbull today, you're going to get the same out of Sorrow. You know what you're going to get out of these guys. Griffiths and Edouard up front, it's something we've been crying out for. But the big issue for me, and I seen it the other night as well against Hamilton, you get into the final third and we just lack ideas, we lack imagination. And I think that comes back to the point being made by Alex Millen. This team seems to lack a bit of imagination. We're still relying on that, that individual bit of brilliance, the shot from Griffiths, the bit of skill by Edouard to get the 2 goals. Because otherwise, we're playing against teams that will pack that defence. We've seen it at Easter Road in the 2-2 game, Colin. It was only when we changed it, 20 minutes to go, that we saw it opening up, because Griffiths started stretching the back line. We still have a lack of width. And what have we done? We've just sold one of our wide players.
Yeah, the width thing's been a big issue for Celtic this season. I think anyone who was a critic before will now turn around and say how much that we miss James Forrest in that side. The creativity that James Forrest can bring in, the width that he can bring in, the fact that he can stretch a defence, that's been desperately missing this season. I think last year he had something like 20 assists and nearly 20 goals. You take that out of the team and that's so many points that you're not winning because of that. You think if you had a James Forrest in some of these really tight games, that just once he would be able to put a ball across and someone would put it in the back of the net. The service that the front two are getting at the minute is really poor. They're not picking the ball up in the box. They're picking the ball up just outside the box. They're then having to create the chance for themselves. You saw it in the game the other day. Lee Griffiths had to shoot from outside the area. He didn't really have a shot from inside the box. Eddie had 1 or 2, but he snatched at them. He's snatching at them because he's not getting them regularly. He doesn't know when the next one's going to come, so he's trying to take it as quick as he can. You saw what happened when he actually get the chance to build something, when he get played in from Griffiths, composed, take it past the goalkeeper into the back of the net. But that service just hasn't been forthcoming this season. And having Ayer at right back, defensively, very good. Going forward, you really need someone out there supporting him. If you go back to the game against St Johnstone, when the ball comes over from the right-hand side from El Hamid, it's Ayer and El Hamid there. having Ayer on his own isn't going to work. He's not going to take someone on one-on-one. He's not going to get the ball across. You need the support out there. And McGregor, Turnbull, Elyounoussi, they're not going to be able to offer that proper support. You need someone like James Forrest there. And I hope that he's back very soon.
No, absolutely. And I think the point I would probably make is, Forrest is due back at some point, Colin, and it would be good to see him on one flank and maybe Mikey Johnston pushed out left, because I know Elyounoussi comes in and he does have a game in him. He is a talented player, but his inconsistency is frustrating. Now, other matters, we've got about 5 minutes before kick-off, but other matters, or a couple of minutes rather, at Celtic Park, obviously in relation to Peter Lawwell's departure, the announcement that he's going to retire. Colin, I didn't have a chance to ask you yesterday, what's your thoughts, what's your overriding thoughts, and what can the new man bring in? What do you think he should introduce to Celtic?
As I said earlier on, I think it will be a complete new structure at the club. Taking a look at it, coming from the background that he comes from, although he's a Celtic fan, he's not really had the experience of working in the football business. I think he'll bring in someone to help him in that sense. And that's where I think the director of football will come in the summer, or the director of football operations, or whatever it's going to be called. And it will be a complete overhaul. There was a great point made, I think, by Ryan118 on YouTube the other day. If you're coming in and you're taking a look at that team and you're trying to develop it for the next generation, for the next season, for the next period, and you look at the management team and the structure and the way that the fans have reacted this season, if you're wanting to get the fans on side, you have to make changes and you have to make them quick. And although he doesn't come in until July, I think already there'll be plans in place in the background that we'll see materialise between now and the end of the season.
And I think that's why Neil Lennon's still in charge of the side, Colin. By Thursday when I was talking to JP, before the announcement, obviously, that Peter Lawwell was retiring, we'd already kind of started talking like that, because we've had all the chat about new managers on the podcast. We spent a whole day talking about Eddie Howe. We spent a whole day talking about Rafa Benitez. I got round to the way of thinking that Celtic aren't going to make a change. And I started thinking that, Thursday last week when I was talking to JP, it makes more sense now, because I know that obviously the new man will want a say in the recruitment process, Colin. But there's a lot of fans even then will be thinking, why are we persisting with Neil Lennon when between now and the end of the season, we're just playing, it's the same old with Neil Lennon. It's not as though he's trying anything new or imaginative. He's not bleeding any young players into the side. And indeed, guys like Ayeti, who clearly need game time, Colin, are sitting on the bench. So, I think we're just going to have to suck it up between now and June.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think we'll hear this the end of this review. A lot of people said it was the end of January. I saw JP Taylor come out and say it would be in the new year. I think we're just kicking the can down the road to the summer, admitting that the season's over, hoping for the best between now and the end of May, and writing this season off and starting again.
Yeah, as strange as that sounds, but the team are on the pitch. They're at Celtic Park. They're on the field. They're doing the huddle. It's time for kick-off, Colin. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved on Twitter, Facebook and on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to us on YouTube. We'll be back at half-time. All that's left for me to say, Colin, is call the cops, and I'll see you at half-time.
It will.